And having looked at one side of the coin, you always have to look at the other side of the coin. If in fact we do have to make cuts, and perhaps they are on the horizon, what city services would you look to reduce or eliminate?
Let me start off with the ones I would not touch. Public safety is one of the ones you do not touch. So leave police and fire and paramedics off that list. But rather than attempt tonight to cherry pick, I believe you really have to sit down and go through each department by department, line item by line item. Then you can determine what your priorities are, what your needs are. Then you can come back and address that. To sit here tonight and tell you what I'm going to look at, what I'm going to cut without any kind of review, it's not right. And also, we have union contracts to consider. You know, there's some things you cannot cut because you're locked in 2 or 3 years or 4 years down the road. So considering that, I'll stick to the idea that we go through the process, department by department, line item by line item, determine what our priorities are and needs are, and go from there.
And we're going to go to Kathleen next.
And I agree with Richard. Public safety is off the table. What I would propose would, number one, be to reduce services, the frequency of services that, for example, landscaping, where maybe we do it several times a week or twice a week. We cut down to once a week. Another area would be similarly expanding the amount of time between replacing our city vehicles, going from replacing them maybe every 3 years to every 5 years. And then third, taking a very, very strong and very robust approach at looking at reducing, or in some cases eliminating, consultants and studies. That takes up a lot of money. And my approach would be to start by examining, number one, which ones are absolutely necessary. If they're going to affect public safety in the next several years, certainly I think there could be an argument made that they're absolutely necessary. So that's number one. We need to look at that. Number two, we need to look at what studies can be delayed until the economic picture improves. And if those studies can be delayed, they're not necessary now, we delay them. And third, where it's feasible to do any necessary studies in-house. If we have the expertise, try to do those in-house so we can maintain and contain costs. And in those instances where we don't have the expertise in-house with our city staff, then make sure that we have a very strong, robust bid process, a competitive bid process, so that we can achieve the lowest cost for the best possible consultant. And that's my answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Wayne?
Well, first I'd like to start out by saying the city needs to do what's referred to as a zero-based budget. You look at all the line items and you have to justify every cost, every expenditure, every program. That's when you identify all of the wasteful and inefficient spending. Now, having said that, here's some things that come right up to my mind. The first thing is highly paid consultants that the city uses. They do studies, surveys, analysis, and then they don't do anything with the results. Those monies could be better spent on actual programs. The city also sends employees for various seminars, travel across the country or throughout the state. Nowadays in the private sector, that's all done on the internet through webinars. Programs like that, those are obvious. It was mentioned before, changing the frequency of our landscaping. Yes, we could cut back on that without any noticeable differences, and that would save money. I'd like to see the city do an energy audit. When you do an energy audit, you find lots of energy conservation that reduces costs, and it's not only good for our environment as well. A lot of expenditures like that. Of course, changing the fleet, the vehicle fleet less often. Cars can be maintained for a long period of times. But the first thing you do is a zero-based budget, and you have to justify each and every program. And that's when you see programs that had some basis maybe years ago that are no longer justified, that you can eliminate without any impact.
Nick?
I've been turning around troubled companies for the last 20 years, and I've had to manage many financial crises in companies. And what you need to do, and what we are doing right now, is, the problem is it's a moving target. We have to do scenario-based planning. It's great to talk about a zero-based budget, but we don't know exactly what amount we're going to need to cut. And so what we've already started implementing and working through the finance subcommittee is defining the various, first of all, a base case budget, and making sure that we balance our budget to that, and I'll talk about how we get there, but also then have a phase 2 where we identify additional cuts so that if the economy gets worse, we're prepared. And then a phase 3 where it even has to get worse. So that's exactly the way for you to approach things and develop a process. Now, in terms of how to identify costs and expenses, a zero-based budgeting is a fancy term, but effectively what you try to do is you try to understand exactly where you're spending your money, and that's all that that means. And what I've done, and we're already doing this to the Finance Subcommittee, and I've got some interesting things for people to look at later, is to look backwards before you look forwards. You look at the last 10 years and figure out exactly how your expenses have grown, where have you expensed it, and you look at it department by department. You're not going to axe an entire department. What you're going to do is look at each individual department, understand how they've grown, and there's some obvious choices as you look at this, as you look at its history of where expenses have grown significantly, and then try to prioritize within those particular departments for lower priority versus higher priority. We don't have the kind of waste that I think Wayne and Kathleen want to see for us to cut millions of dollars. What we do have are a lot of lower priority programs that don't help the community as much as some of the higher priority programs. And so we are going to have to cut, but we're going to be looking to cut at those lower priorities, and we're going to then reallocate that money to find ways to fund our higher priorities.
And Peter, your comments.
Well, I mean, I'll tell you one thing I wouldn't cut, and that's kickball. Obviously, I was just using that as a demonstration for a building, sense of community building. You know, we spending increased in 07-08 by $3.7 million. I think that's the first place you got to look. What are we spending our money on? You know, in these fiscal years when we're going to have to cut back. You know, I agree with Wayne. The scheduled automobile replacement costs. Last year we spent over $500,000 replacing automobiles. I don't foresee a reason why that could have been delayed. And third, we have a real workman's comp. I need a drink of water. Workman comp situation going on in our city. It raised 2/3 in the past year. It was previously $1.8 million. It's expected to be $3 million in the next year. We need to work with our insurance carrier, figure out a way to get these people back to work, if it's even part-time or on some sort of temporary basis. It's going to cut the cost of employing people at overtime, double time, and other folks who are you know, it adds a drain to the budget, and it's costing us money. And there are areas that we can look at like that are going to save us money instead of cutting programs. Thank you.